Avec Shuster Studio presents
I strongly support the freedom of speech. I may not like what's going on in this show, but I'll devote my life to ensure it exists.
Hello from Kyiv, this is Shuster Live in English. Ukrainians are trying to literally digest the news about the wealth of their political elite. Tens of thousands of civil servants, starting from a president, then prime minister, members of parliament, judges, central bank employees, they had to file e-declarations. It's as Financial Times put it very sharply, it was an exercise in transparency. E-declarations of wealth, it was a part of anti-corruption initiative. What did people find out? People found out that only members of parliament, 413 of them, filed e-declarations. They have accumulated $460 million held in cash or in banks. To better understand what it means, we have in our studio today Peter Dickinson, publisher of Business Ukraine magazine, Paul NILAND, writer, founder of Statement Email, RAHEMTULLA, a reporter at Kyiv Post, and Taras SHEVCHENKO, who is a founder, a co-founder of Ukrainian NGOs dealing with corruption issues. Let me start with three quotes. One is from Business Ukraine. You had the Ukrainian ambassador to Austria, Alexander Sherba. That's what he said.
Revolutionary concept for Ukraine. The most exciting thing about the declarations for me is this: they won't go away. This is not a tweet you can erase. You cannot claim your account was hacked. It is not a journalistic revelation soon forgotten or challenged. These are personal testimonies laid bare before the Ukrainian people. We have finally arrived at a point where, at least if you are a state servant, you don't have to pretend to be poor, but you must be able to account for your wealth. This means more accountability for the elite and more leverage for voters.
Another quote from Financial Times. The paper is quoting a representative of one of Ukraine's Western financial backers, and he said that declarations appeared absolutely scandalous. There are people who have not worked, declaring millions in cash and property. And a third quote is from our show, Friday show, where one of the participants said that this e-declaration is equivalent to two revolutions. Orange Revolution, the Revolution of Dignity, and now these electronic declarations, and we know a lot about the political elite. What do you make of it, Paul?
Exactly as Ambassador Sherba said, this is now leverage for the voters. The information is out there, gives us in the future something on which we can build. There's this information that voters can decide based on that in the future. Do I want that person representing my constituency in Parliament? Do I want that person representing me? Does that person live anything like my real life? But I think what it's done, and it is the equivalent of two revolutions, what it's done is it's changed the future of Ukrainian politics. We know who the politicians are and we know the money that they've made to date, but they're not allowed to do that anymore. There will be no further mass enrichment of people that are holding public office because they simply can't.
But were you surprised by the amount of wealth? You were not?
No, I was surprised by how little certain politicians declared. I think that people have put the minimum amount that they could possibly, some people have put the minimum amount they could possibly get away with on their declarations. Some I thought were very surprising. But in general, no. In general, no.
And you, Taras?
I wasn't surprised with the amount of money. Probably I was a little bit surprised with how many expensive stuff people have, like watches, like, I don't know, guns, paintings, and...
someone even knows a church.
Yeah, exactly. And for some people it was already known because they were like wearing in public, but for some it was quite hidden. And I think especially with expensive watches, I think it may change a culture because expensive watch was a normal gift for a minister or equivalents. I think they will start avoiding having such presents from now.
Peter, but what kind of a message does Ukraine give, say, to United States, to European Union, to International Monetary Fund? What kind of a message?
The initial message is quite negative, obviously, because it implies that, A, there's huge corruption, and B, there's huge wealth. So I think a common reaction amongst a lot of the international media and international partners of Ukraine was, why are we financing these people? They've got more money than us.
Didn't everyone already know that, though?
Yes, I think they did to an extent, but still, there is an inevitable initial reaction that sort of throws it in people's faces when they say, we've got this incredible wealth. But I think beyond that, it does send out a message that there are steps to countering this. The crucial thing now is that something is done. You mentioned the two revolutions. I think that's a pertinent parallel to draw. And then what we don't want to happen is what happened certainly after the Orange Revolution, when there was an opening up of the media, but nothing actually changed very much, and the corrupt practices continued. There were no consequences, so people were able to know more about what was happening, but there was nothing actually done to actually stop it from happening. I think now it's absolutely crucial that steps are taken, if not to actually take the wealth away from these people who've acquired it by illicit means, but to prevent it from continuing, to prevent politics being a business.
Rahim, you say they knew it.
I think so. I mean, I think
they may have felt it, but now they know it.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, that does sort of strike a chord. I suppose everyone would have assumed. I think in Ukraine, like as in Russia, public servants and others in the government, they have a lot of money and they are rich, much beyond what their salaries would suggest. So, I suppose just seeing it written down on paper and actually having them, go through this motion of physically, declaring this is what I have. I think that does obviously makes it very real, and it does hurt. I think
it hurts.
I think it hurts. I think it definitely hurts. I mean, as much as people will say, we're not surprised. We've been disillusioned for so long, but I think it still hurts.
Now, talking about the revolutions, the first Orange Revolution, I remember people saying, and I was working in Moscow then, and to us, to reporters, well, it's a revolution of millionaires against billionaires, right? And what is this?
Most of them, they are millionaires, not billionaires, still. But I think that the main message is that Ukraine is changing. And 5 years ago, we established with colleagues movement Chesno, and there were like several points that we were advocating for. The first one was actually to get a paper declaration of members of parliament. Legislation at that moment was not providing any accessibility of these documents. And I remember when we decided to send 450 personal letters to every member of parliament, and only 33 of them voluntarily provided us with their written declarations. But it was without cash, without ownership, with rights for the legal entities, and without many stuff that's only for the first time we've got open in this country. And of course, emotional effect is wow, but reasonable effect is Ukraine is changing, and it will never be the same as it used to be before.
But can I add, though? I mean, what Taras is saying is absolutely right. Ukraine is changing, but it's changing because of the work that's being done by activist groups like yours, like Chesno. To get us to a point where all of these members of parliament and the other tens of thousands of other bureaucrats and other people have actually made these declarations. That's a phenomenal effort that was taken by lots of civil society groups. And what needs to happen now, as Peter correctly said, is the next step must be consequences. You know, now these people have been forced to make their declarations. Now we have to look at what they're going to do. And the Prosecutor General, Lutsenko, said the day after the deadline for filing the declarations that the next step is anybody who has in excess of $100,000 must now begin to demonstrate where that wealth has come from, how they've acquired that money. And that was unexpected for me. But consequences, right?
Yeah,
you can't have a society without consequences.
Yeah, but what consequences do you expect? Or should we start talking about amnesty?
Well, this would be the year zero approach, saying, okay, what was done, but from now on, we have a different approach. I think that's, as much as it might not satisfy a lot of people's desire for justice to be done, it might be the most pragmatic and realistic approach to say, okay, guys, this is the new Ukraine, this is the new approach, this is the way it's going to be from now on. But frankly speaking, I would randomly suggest that there's very, very few people in this group, in this huge group, who could justify what they've got. No. Very, very few. Perhaps almost none. I mean, it's probably just the oligarch group who actually, the oligarchs themselves who actually can vouch for where their funds come from. The vast majority of people have never had jobs in business, have never run businesses. So there is literally, almost by definition, there's no way they can justify this sort of wealth. I mean, their incomes are absolutely minimal. So to prosecute them all, where does that leave us?
It's not going to be practical, is it? It's not to try to put everyone on this declaration who is declaring something which they can't justify. It's surely, it seems to, it runs too deep, doesn't it, this problem?
Too deep.
Too deep. I mean, it's too widespread, isn't it, among the elite?
Yeah, well.
You can't just, put half the country's political class in jail overnight, I suppose, as much as you might like to.
95%, perhaps, yeah. But no, it would be a popular move for a brief period, I think, with some. But yeah, it would be counterproductive. But a year zero approach, looking forward to the next elections.
But you see, if we talk, it's say equivalent of third revolution. So the first revolution, high expectations, and then disappointment. This last one, almost the same. Enormous expectations, and war, and disappointment. So, and declarations, what kind of consequences, what should be done so that Ukrainians don't feel disappointed once more?
Communicate more, communicate better. And I mean, I hear this a lot, that people are saying, what's changed after the revolution? I think after the Orange Revolution, what changed was the media landscape, first of all. And then after the last revolution, certainly a lot has changed. And there's a very good, based out of Moscow, in fact, the Carnegie Endowment office in Moscow do a very good Ukraine reform report, which is well worth reading. They do it on a quarterly basis. And you can see that that's an independent and credible organization who are looking at, and actually the Kyiv Post also does a very, very good reform watch too. And Peter writes about it frequently. We know, those of us that observe Ukraine very, very closely, we know that there are reforms. We know that things are changing, and the Declaration is just one example of that. The problem is that I don't think Ukraine as a country communicates this successfully enough. And I remember there was a situation with one of the best reforms, one of the best known reforms, is the new patrol police. And when there was a question mark there, when one of their senior people in Kyiv resigned, and I know the guy quite well, actually, Vladislav Vlasyuk, and there was an interview in Reuters about this, and people in Moscow-based journalists were saying, Ukraine's one and only reform post-Maidan is unraveling. And I'm writing to them, I'm going, what do you mean one and only reform? It's ridiculous. There have been literally hundreds and hundreds of new laws. The changes to the tax code to bring the salaries out of the dark and that kind of thing, There's been a lot, but people aren't aware. That's the biggest issue. It's communication, which is why I think it's great that you've decided to do this English language show.
Well, I think we need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, simply need it. But Taras, let's pick up Rahim's words. You cannot put in prison all the political elite. So basically, what do? This is now, public is waiting for something to happen. People want justice. But what kind of justice in these conditions?
There is absolutely no need to put everyone in jail. But I disagree with the idea that zero declaration is the next step that shall be done. I think that several people in jail will provide much more better effect than zero declaration or everyone in jail. Yeah, that's We live in a country where impunity is a big concern. It was great concern after Orange Revolution because there was a slogan that bandits should be in prison and nothing happened. We have disappointment now that's also not previous elite, not this elite is not in jail. There is unfortunately bad judicial system. So what we will as civil society now press for is for evaluation of these declarations, for the NABU, Special Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office, to do their duty and to have at least several top officials that would go to jail so that others would see that this is possible because they just don't believe in that. Yeah, I think this is more important for the country, and that's our agenda.
But tell me, please, first person that we look at is the president of a country. So basically, he owns manufacturing business, and we know about it, declared 26 million in addition to ownership of his business sources, and that's about it.
I can't give you any name who should be the first one in the list. Yeah, but I think
I'm not suggesting.
Yeah, but I would like to point where the bottleneck is now. The bottleneck is judiciary, and one of our major now advocacy goal for the coalition of organization called Reanimation package of reforms, where I work as well, is anti-corruption court, because we have great new institution, NABU, that is provided very good job, I believe. There is Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, but we are just lacking...
They're an investigative instrument, right?
Yeah, but...
So now you want an
judiciary.
anti-corruption court?
Absolutely.
Specialized court?
Yes, that would consider the cases on corruption, because we have already dozens of cases investigated, sent to court, and then just no one hear these cases for months, for half a year. So that's the thing that should end the circle of revealing data, checking this data, start investigation, and then having the decision on judiciary level. And this is the last bastion, the last battle to have in order to deal with impunity. With zero declaration, this will make work harder. I understand from global point of view that we shall have elites not I don't know, think about future, not so much about past, not being in defensive position because they attack us and they trying to get worse legislation about civil society so that we declare, or some legislation like in Russia being introduced in Ukraine. Yeah, this is also the thing that we can debate. But the expectation of the public, the expectation of people who live in Ukraine, who saw this data, if they hear the idea that let's now just provide amnesty for every millionaire who gets illegal funds, it will not work. It's maybe only debatable that if it was just an issue of non-paying taxes, that's one story. But if it was an issue of having bribes and then declaring this money and then saying, well, okay, that's fine, this will not work.
But let's take the example of Prime Minister, because we talked about it with him on Friday. He did it publicly. He declared 1.5 million in cash. So what he's saying that money he earned in business before being elected mayor of Vinnytsia, and he was elected twice. And did he have it in cash? Because basically he was always blackmailed. For instance, by Yanukovych regime. Or you join our party, or we freeze all your money. So he held it in cash. Now he doesn't have it in cash. Apparently, it's already in banks. So it's a plausible explanation.
It's plausible, no, certainly. I think, a lot of these guys will probably have plausible explanations for where that money came from. The question is, I think, is the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and these other investigative bodies, are they going to have the resources, the manpower, the money, the political backing to go after these guys. Because I'm sure they all have very plausible stories, and they've probably wrapped it up in, maybe in, who knows, in, maybe in other people's names, in shell companies. They've tried to perhaps hide what they've got. So it's going to take a huge amount of work, I think, to uncover what is really behind these declarations. I think that's the big question now, going forward.
But usually, in a European country, if something like that happens, okay, let's take example of Italy, clean hands. Basically, it's a political revolution. Mm-hmm. Parties start disappearing, politicians start disappearing, somebody escapes, somebody is in prison, somebody loses absolutely any public support. Now, and here,
I think here we're seeing the same. And there were two members of parliament who fled the country rather than filing their declarations. Good riddance to bad rubbish, right? Bye-bye. If they choose to leave, they're gone. But I think that if we come back, what Rahim just said is very, very important. But what Taras said prior to that is key to understanding what's next. The bottleneck is the judiciary, right? We can't hope to have fair processes in courts as long as the judges that we have in this country are still corrupt. And this has been a major drive or a major topic of conversation that I've been seeing from a lot of diplomats over the last 6 months or 9 months, that's the next big step. So the declarations were great, but if the judiciary is still corrupt, then can we expect to be putting people in prison? They're just going to buy the way out of it, right? That's what has to happen.
But do you have people to form a new judiciary which is not corrupt?
That's a very good question. 3 months ago, we started a new campaign based on our experience with Rada, with Parliament 5 years ago. We started a similar campaign with judiciary, Chesno filtering judiciary. Mm-hmm. We monitoring this data very much. And what we have from the beginning of the year, 2,000 judges out of 7 resigned. Resigned because they didn't like to pass the test of explaining with the public commission, mm-hmm. With the monitors and journalists, explaining where they got the money. They opted to resign with quite a good financial benefits. There was special decision of the Constitutional Court to provide them good financial status. Now the main issue is new competitions. New competitions to the Supreme Court, because we have new Supreme Court that shall be formed within 3-4 months, yep. And new competition for the lower courts, judges for the lower courts. And we now very much encourage lawyers who can apply for this position, mm-hmm. who flow from universities, because professor of the university with 10-year experience may now apply to become a judge of Supreme Court, which is very unique. Yep. And elections to the Supreme Court is even more important than elections to the parliament, because they probably happen once in a century. Maybe these are last elections to the Supreme Court, because that's the total renewal of the Supreme Court. And I think that electronic declaration and this disappointment of the public and all these negative speeches about that, it's good for forming judiciary, because those who understand that they will be in the same position, they will probably not apply. We cannot say that we will have great judges. It's only how great they will be. Yeah, they I believe will be better than the previous ones, than those 2,000 that decided to resign. So I see this as a step forward, and we as civil society doing all what's in our efforts to make this step bigger.
We'll break for a couple of minutes. Welcome to Shuster Live in English, and as we're in English, Taras, I'll continue the issue of judges. If we talk about the Anti-Corruption Court, and the Parliament is going to discuss it in the very near future, what kind of judges do you need in the Anti-Corruption Court? Or cannot Ukraine turn to its diaspora, for instance, people with experience, in law in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, who have experience, maybe they're even retired, and they're ready to serve Ukraine now?
I'll respond to you a little bit differently. I believe it's not an issue that we don't have lawyers with good reputation, with solid experience, and with good values. That's rather an issue of who is selection committee. And I think that was the strength when NABU was formed, when selection committee included foreigners with great reputation, and probably like people from Diaspora and so on, because those who will be making decision, who will be judge of the Supreme Court or who will be the judge of Anticorruption Court, that's the most important. We have great professors here. Yeah. We have great lawyers here with 10+ experience who can apply for such position. There are enough local experts. But the scheme that we see is providing there should be international partners in selection committee that is making final decision. The same as it was with NABU.
I think we've seen over the last couple of years as well, actually, like speaking of the diaspora, like a lot of Ukrainians have come back to Ukraine since the Maidan. I've spoken to some of them myself, mostly sort of they had careers in London or in the city, in Washington, for example, and they saw what was going on in this country and they thought, well, I've got to come back, I've got to serve my country, you know, now is the time. So, I mean, that's a really good trend. I mean, unfortunately, quite a few of those people did become disillusioned, and I think not all of them have stuck around in their jobs. I think especially, you know, we had Ivaris Abramovich, the former economy minister. He came out this year very strongly and said that he was, you know, basically fed up and people were still doing things in the old ways. And once he left, I think, you know, quite a few other Ukrainians and ones who wanted to help this country from the West, they left too. So, I mean, I think it's a great thing, but it's not, you know, you've also got to do it locally. It's not the answer. But
it's a great resource.
It's a great resource.
The diaspora, I think, is a very untapped resource. I mean, if you just look at the numbers, I mean, we're talking about, what is it, 1.5 million in Canada, and my understanding is not just this is just a population. They're a very successful diaspora.
But it's less work for judiciary. If you're a judge, you should be familiar with local legislation.
Yeah, I don't mean only in terms of the judges. I'm talking in a broader reform sense. To come back, it's civil society as well, to tap into the great passion that exists there and the experience that they have at their hands. And this is something that the Baltic states managed to do quite well. A lot of the even the political leadership in the Baltics in the 1990s was drawn from the diaspora. Mm-hmm. Even the outgoing Estonian president was a New Jersey lad. And was very
well. And Lithuanian President Adamkus was an American.
It was a very successful approach and a way of sort of melding these two aspects of Western support and local know-how, local knowledge, which I think, in general, the diaspora could play a much bigger role in the reform process than it does now, and Ukraine should be arguably doing more to reach out to them and make it easy for them to come back and get involved. But the judges, yeah, certainly there is enough. I work with a lot of the law firms in Ukraine, and there's huge expertise that can be tapped into. I think if we're talking about the judges and getting a new generation of judges, for me, one of the key issues that needs to be addressed is salaries, is payments. I think if you pay people uncompetitive rates, and frankly, most of the people who fill out declarations have official salaries of, you know, well below $1,000, in some cases below, you know, $200 or $300 a month equivalent. It's almost inevitable that they're going to be involved in some sort of supplementary schemes. You know, they're almost being forced towards a corrupt path, and so until you address the issue of salaries, these problems are going to just come round again and again. You're going to clean the house out, and then it's going to start again when the next batch comes in and realises they can't live on this sort of money.
I wanted to say actually exactly the same thing in response to what Rahim was saying. You were saying that some of the people that were on the team of the former economy minister, Ivaras, became disillusioned, and it wasn't just under Ivaras, under Pivovarsky as well. You know, people were saying not necessarily that they were disillusioned, they couldn't live on the salaries. I mean, they made an effort. They came in to participate in those early wave of changes, but you can't expect somebody who has a family to provide for to be working for $250 or $300 per month.
But public opinion in Ukraine sort of doesn't like politicians or civil servants getting high salaries. So that's again communication. You have to, I think if you want people who are in the legislative or in the executive, but they be honest and not corrupt, they have to have decent salaries.
Yeah. But it's a chicken and egg situation, though. They don't like it because they're like, well, they've stolen all this money anyway. Why are we paying them high salaries? So it goes around. It's cyclical. If they weren't stealing, if it was a situation where, okay, they get high salaries so that they will not steal, then I think there'd be a much more open, and public would be a lot more receptive to it. If they said, okay, we pay them a lot of money and they don't steal and they actually do their jobs, I think a lot of people would say, well, wonderful, fantastic.
Let me ask you a question. And can we talk about the courage of those people who declared what they have?
I would say to an extent, yes. I would say it was a leap into the unknown. No one, even now, we don't know what the consequences will be of this. And my assumption, I think it's the general assumption that everyone was careful to declare so much, but not everything. Yep. But even so, I had expected when the results were made public for them to be a lot more modest than they were. So I think people have been quite brave. I think for the Prime Minister of a country to declare that he's got $1.5 million in cash at home is pretty bold step. That's a pretty shocking statement. Did they do it out of fear? I don't know. I mean, fear of what? What are the consequences? We don't know.
Do you feel that there is anything in the argument that by doing this, they've sort of insulated themselves against accusations of corruption and hoarding money in a sense? They said, look, this is what I've got. It's out there now. Case closed. Leave me alone.
So in other words, they basically thought about a theoretical amnesty.
Well, in a sense.
I tell the truth.
Yeah.
And you forgive me.
It's like now there's no rumors, like, does he own this, does he own that, what has he got? Now it's just there. Now you know what I've got. Stop asking me about it, you know? Do you feel like that?
Taras, does it make sense?
It partly can work. I can remember when media were discussing previous President Yanukovych criminal records, and once they made public statement, explain everything from their side, this story became less visible in media. Yeah, so when you declare publicly, even something that is painful, it will be painful for a moment, and then the attention may be much more smaller.
I'm not sure that the attention went away from that, and I know for a fact that every time Peter wrote the name Yanukovych, he always preceded it with twice convicted criminal Yanukovych.
I was very much impressed, again, with the show we had on Friday when Member of Parliament Konstantinovsky came, and he was the man in the news all the week because he declared 15 million, if I'm not mistaken, in cash. And he explained it before Ukraine to all the audience. I sold the bank. I paid taxes. I don't trust the banking system. I don't trust the central bank because the hryvnia, it just goes up and down. So I keep it. It's also, but he'll appear in the anti-corruption court, for instance.
Yeah. Well, whereas I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because that's sort of like suggesting that perhaps there could be a change of culture. I mean, why do not Ukrainians look at him and say, hey, great job, well done. You've made your money. And, you know, I mean, isn't that what in the States right now, to draw sort of parallel, like with Donald Trump, don't people look at him like that a little bit and say, hey, actually, this is a good guy. He's played the system maybe, but he's done well.
But he's a businessman. I mean, I think the issue with the Ukrainian situation is not so much the guys at the extreme end who have enormous wealth, who have a background in business. It's the guys who've been in politics since they were like 25 years old or 27 years old, and they've never had a senior position in any company or any discernible assets, and yet they have these millions in assets. So they've clearly achieved this wealth from their political position. You know, it's the concept that the Verkhovna Rada and by extension, the whole state apparatus is a business, is a way of leveraging finance, leveraging business interests. And I think if there are consequences that can be shown now for people who have gone down that road, people will be discouraged from following them if they know that they will face this scrutiny and they won't be able to do it.
I'll tell a nasty thing now. We've been discussing until this moment a situation in a country which is not in war. Yeah. And now let's a little bit think that the country is in war. And there are scores of young people who are there in the front. Yeah. And dying every day. Yeah. And those news, that they get about the wealth, not of a nation, the wealth of a political elite, I think it's it's discouraging. To my opinion, to say the least.
I'm sure
I think absolutely. I think for them more than perhaps everyone else, it's a blow.
But I think that's why the key message that comes out of these e-declarations should not necessarily be look at how much money these guys were hoarding. The key message should be look at what a phenomenal step Ukraine has just taken. This is actually unprecedented. I can't think of any other country in the world where all of the politicians and all of the bureaucrats and the whole state apparatus, where everybody has to declare all of their wealth.
I didn't believe it until the last moment. I didn't believe it would happen.
I think it hasn't sunk in yet how big a step it was. I think it's still, people are still digesting
But
this.
that's the story. That's where the accent should be. It should be, what has been called the most corrupt country in Europe, yes, now has this mandatory declaration of wealth of all of those politicians. It's a massively positive thing.
Incredibly paradoxical, isn't it? As
Yes.
ever,
Yeah.
as ever with
and
Ukraine.
most transparent.
As ever.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
most corrupt and most transparent. There's a
I
paradox.
think now we got the interesting. Well, in terms of if we're talking about again consequences and repercussions and paying the price for corruption, I think another impact that we will see from this is now, as I understood, this is going to be an ongoing process of declarations. So the next declarations compared to these declarations will be very interesting as well, because then we see any differences. And it's like, well, hold on, you've just accumulated this huge amount of money in the last year. Where did that come from? Again, so then we start with the, then people will be aware as they go forward, well, I can't do that because it will go in my declaration and then I'll be in trouble next year or the year after. So these are a very good basis point as well for that process.
For example, I heard that a judge for a court decision got very big house. Yeah. Now, when there is already his e-declaration, he just cannot explain how this big house, how he obtained ownership for that. Yeah, it will be absolutely impossible to do after having initial. It's not like zero, but still like initial declaration. So I think this is very good prevention mechanism, and I even more believe in preventing corruption than in like battling or like punishing corruption, because punishment in many cases it will be considered as political opponents and so on. Preventing corruption mechanisms, they have much more bigger strengths.
Another benefit of this as well, I mean, potentially as well, a little bit down the line, is that this was one of the demands by the European Union, wasn't it, for visa-free travel for Ukrainians to the Schengen zone. So, that's a huge game changer as well, potentially. So if that does come to pass, then...
Yeah, but I want to remind that initially it was initiative of civil society, of non-governmental organizations who had Reanimation package of reforms. Then afterwards, supported by EU, supported by International Monetary Fund, and that's how our coalition building works. Yeah. And the same with Anticorruption Court. It was initially Shabunin and Anti-Corruption Action Center who were the first to start campaigning for that, and now it's again one of the parameters of International Monetary Fund. And of course, the strength of civil society in Ukraine big, but donors of Ukraine having much more bigger arguments. And the fact that electronic declaration finally worked, despite of so many many obstacles that were on this way, is of course the result of such cooperation of civil society and our foreign partners.
Rahim, your paper is doing a series of very good stories about the oligarchs. But okay, they don't file declarations, or they didn't yet. But they're playing a huge role in this corruption system in politics.
Yes.
Because basically, it's them.
The biggest role, really.
Yeah, the biggest one.
Yeah.
So basically, the roots of that wealth comes from them, actually.
Yeah.
And how do you create a mechanism, political mechanism, where the oligarchs are not anymore part of the game?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, you think we haven't really got to the heart of the matter?
They haven't, I think.
No. But I don't know, I suppose, yeah, I mean, the question of how to break down the dominance of the oligarchs in business and in politics, that's obviously Maybe, I mean, that's a huge other topic in itself, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. Do you somehow have to pass legislation which requires them to make
we have to be honest, at least in English. They have political factions in the parliament. They pay parallel salaries. They pay it, of course, under the table. Money is much more than their official salaries are. And basically here, it's absolutely straight corruption. And what do you do with that, Taras?
We support raising salaries, to politicians, but also to other officials. If you speak about good salaries for public officials, I think the best practice, how it worked, is that having increase of the salary is connected also with some qualification exam, or as with traffic police, with new competition for the traffic police. So if you pass the new competition and you compete with not only those who are from the system, then you get better payment. If you pass competition to NABU, then you get better payment. And the same linkage now is done with judiciary. Raising of salaries for judiciary is provided in constitutional reform, but only for those judges who pass qualification, where they could explain where the money came from, or for those judges who were newly appointed. Now, by the way, the Supreme Court is trying to say that this provision is non-constitutional because it's like non-equality for previous judges and for new judges. But we highly support the way how it's done.
This would be, if you take the idea of the third revolution, the declarations, I would say this should be the fourth revolution, to raise the salaries. And it's happened to an extent, but it's been like we've raised salaries by 30% or 50%. They need to raise salaries by 1,000%. At least say, well, let's say 500, 600%. I mean, people need to be getting competitive salaries that will allow them to live a comfortable life. And then the scrutiny will be much more easy to apply.
Absolutely. If I'm a member of parliament and I earn $800-900 a month, I cannot maintain my family. And here an oligarch comes and says, listen, I'll pay you $10,000 a month, you just vote as I say. If I'm very honest, I just leave the parliament and I say, well, I'm going to earn my money somewhere else. Here I can't make it. If I'm not, well, I take it.
It was a mistake, I think, on the day, again, the public reaction to the declaration. I think it was a understandable but nevertheless a mistake when the day after the declarations came out, or in the last week, and they said, oh, we cancel the raise for deputies, the salary raise, because the public was so angry about all this wealth. They said, oh, well, we can't possibly raise salaries at the same time as this public anger. But actually, it would have been a way of saying, well, you know what? You want to stop this, then we've got to pay them a reasonable salary. And we should have gone ahead with that and said, you know, it looks ugly. We understand the communication. Again, we understand the anger that this creates, but you must understand, unless we pay people higher, it's going to continue. You want to stop it? Let's be realistic about this. Let's pay them more, and then we scrutinise them, and then they can't say, well, you know what it is, so I'm not getting much money. What do you expect? We expect honesty, but you have to pay for that.
But I think the question that Savik was asking was how do we deal with the oligarchs, and specifically then how do we stop oligarchs from keeping members of parliament in their pocket? And one way is to pay them a sensible salary. But there have been other moves against the oligarchs as well following the revolution. And I mean, one of the greatest sources of state corruption was always in the doling out of state contracts, right? We know how Yanukovych's son, the dentist, became the richest dentist in the world when his father was the president. And another great reform that we've seen is the Prozoro procurement project, which, you know, has massively changed that. And so whereas we used to see to Yanukovych, the dentist, and to Mr. Akhmetov and various other people, they would be getting 95% of state contracts. Now the state is saving money and actually getting a better service, and the money's not going to oligarchs. That was huge too,
Civil
right?
society, again. Civil society
Driving
pushed
force
it. There.
Yeah, came up with the initiative and created the system.
It's the dream team. It's civil society, international support, and political acceptance stroke will within Ukraine. Where those three forms align themselves, there is success, and Prozoro may be the greatest result of that. Now let's hope we can see that repeated with the...
But that means that the civil society eventually has to go into politics.
Well,
Because
we've
if
sent
you
a
need
number of representatives.
You have given it up, yeah.
Oksana Seroid, who is vice chairman of parliament, she was leading expert of judicial reform at our coalition RPR. Svetlana Zalishchuk is from civil society and also from RPR. Hanna Hopko, and I can provide dozens of names. That's not enough. And I also disagree with that, with your idea that there are only two choices, whether to accept money from oligarchs or leave the parliament. I truly believe there are several dozens of members of parliament who still fight there in parliament, not accepting money from oligarchs and having this salary of $800, which absolutely is not enough. It's very unfortunate that the moment when parliament decided to vote for increase for the salary was the same moment when they were providing the electronic declaration. Yeah, from informational point of view, it was very bad idea.
Poorly managed.
Yeah, it shouldn't happen simultaneously. You show that you have millions in cash, and then you increase, in the same time you increase salary. It was very bad from PR point of view.
But it's quite normal for people to come from civil society into politics. I mean, that's a trend you see across the world, in Britain as well, and it's quite normal. I think it's quite it's a good breeding ground for politicians. People get involved in civil society, and then they graduate to the political sphere, and new guys come in and take their place. I'd rather see civil society guys come into Parliament than business people, for example, although ideally probably you'd have a mix. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that's actually a positive thing.
Do you think then, is it just a matter of time more than anything else? As these young guys who are now in their 20s and 30s are being involved in civil society, and they've travelled abroad a bit probably, and they see the way things are done differently, and they have a different view, and as they sort of grow up, as you say, graduate, they'll move into Parliament and into other positions of power, and things will change that way. Do you think?
There is a generational shift taking place. I think it's not a given. We can't just accept that it's going to happen. You know, that it's not
a generational change is taking place.
I feel
it's not as visible as one would expect, but it's taking place.
You've got to take a step back and see. You know, and you've got to go back before the Orange Revolution, go back to the 1990s, and see how shocking what we've seen over the last week would be to someone from the class of 2000 and 2002, the last Kuchma Parliament. These sort of things would be totally unthinkable. And in most of the other, the rest of the former Soviet space, which inevitably Ukraine has to be compared to at this stage, these things would be totally unheard of. And frankly speaking, that needs to be acknowledged. Well, it makes people angry that this incredible wealth is being declared, but on the other hand, what a step! What a reflection of these broader changes taking place.
Why do you think the European and American media didn't pay great attention to e-declaration?
They were excited by these incredible declarations of wealth. I mean,
that's the story.
It's a story. It's not a story to say, this country is taking very broad steps towards becoming a normal country. That's not really a very interesting headline. They say, okay, well done. Why weren't you there before? What is funny is say, wow, this guy's got, the Prime Minister's got $1.5 million. This guy's got $5 million. This guy's got $500 million. That's attractive headline writing, and it does get, this is unfortunate. There's not a huge amount of detailed interest in Ukraine in the outside world. There's not. However, that might seem unfair here, perhaps, but simply, these sort of stories are sexy. They sell. So maybe down the line we'll see this is listed as one of the achievements of the reform. We'll now see, it'll be the patrol police, it'll be Pro-Zorro, it'll be the declarations.
Yeah.
It'll join the list, and gradually the list is getting longer and longer, and it's getting harder and harder to say nothing has changed.
Yep.
But the initial reaction was very tabloid style, very much like the exciting sort of salacious headlines about this.
Yeah, they prefer Cartier to something else. I don't remember.
Yeah, the guy had a
Louis
church. The
Vuitton,
guy had the ticket to fly to Mars, is it, or the moon? I forget which. But
to fly into space on Virgin Atlantic.
Yeah.
There was Filatov. But I read about that a long time ago, that he'd bought a ticket. That one didn't surprise me. But what is also not going to be a sexy headline, we're talking about the motivation of people in civil society to go into Parliament. Do you know who's not motivated now to go into Parliament? It's people that wanted to get wealthy.
Well,
all of those people who simply saw a seat in the Verkhovnaya Rada as that's my ticket. I'm going to be rich. I'm going to be a millionaire. It's gone.
And that's very positive.
Absolutely.
Well, so it's not a threat.
It's not a threat, you think, it's because of the Declaration.
Because of the Declarations.
I think now it's harder. It's harder now to hide that money,
Yes.
but not impossible.
Not impossible.
Like you said, the oligarchs are still there. The oligarchs.
Then the next conversation is the
hegemony
Panama
hasn't been
Papers,
broken.
right? So,
Yeah.
But another thing I wanted to, briefly to ask you is Valentin Nalyvaichenko, the former chief of security service, he said that the United States is going to pay now great attention to Ukrainian MPs because of the cash issue. Because Americans don't, sort of, the cash, it smells.
Yes, it stinks. Well, this is all to be seen. I think now we're, it's pure speculation to say what the implications will be down the line. I think that certainly there will be a lot of detailed analysis of all these amongst Ukraine's partners, as well as amongst the Ukrainian civil society and the Ukrainian Anticorruption Bureau. What the outcome is hard to say, but I think certainly foreign partners will be very, very cautious about engaging with anyone whose declaration shows they have huge personal wealth, because they will be, the newspapers in the West will say, our minister or our parliament or our government is working with Mr. X, who has 25 Cartier watches and a Van Gogh painting, or whatever it may be. And that will be very damaging for them domestically. So I think it makes a lot of the people in Ukrainian politics toxic. It makes people cautious of engaging with them, and that's also to the plus. Again, as Paul says, it will make people in the future think, well, do I want to put myself into this? Do I want to put myself in front, under that kind of scrutiny?
I mean, in the coming years then, I suppose picking up on your point about how this system is just starting, and in the coming years we're going to see decorations are going to change, and we'll be able to measure what that changes. I feel like it could go one of two ways. Either, like you say, people are going to clean up their act because it's going to become politically difficult for them to carry on with these outrageous declarations, or they're going to learn how to game the system.
Well, that's what politicians do all over the world, frankly speaking, and I think it would be naive for us to think that the Ukrainian politicians are the only dishonest politicians in the world. I'm saying any country in the world, politicians are assumed to be the biggest liars in society to a greater or lesser degree, however much we might wish it were otherwise. And they do game the system, and there are different ways of doing it, and there's different names applied to it. And there are oligarchs, or people playing the role of oligarchs in every system, who go by different names, who we don't necessarily call oligarchs, but who have similar levels of financial clout and influence through their different leverage. But
you have to look at who financed the Brexit debate on.
Well, the Brexit debate would be a very good example. The whole UKIP and the whole side. But this is not a secret. But in a more developed, more mature democracies, they have a lot more rigid systems in place to counter these things and to make it more difficult, and that's all you can expect to do. There's always going to be a desire to game the system, but all you can do is create as rigid or as tough a system as possible to make it difficult for them and make it unattractive. Whereas at the moment, it's almost like, well, I'm going to go into politics and immediately I'll have huge wealth and I'll be getting payoffs left, right and centre. And to take away that, it's a step in that direction, which has to be positive. It's
a new institution, I think, the E-Declarations. I think that's what it's about, isn't it?
It depends on what our colleagues in civil society can achieve. I mean, in the media as well, of course, we have a big role to play, but I think civil society has a huge role to play now, working with the judiciary and the government to create this framework where it becomes less attractive for these people and where it becomes more difficult for them, where there's costs involved.
I remember when 5 years ago we were doing the Chesno movement. Another parameter that was there was the rate of those members of parliament who is not showing up in office. The number one was Mr. Akhmetov. Mm-hmm. And 1 month's campaign with the public pressure turned him to the position that he publicly said that he will not run campaign in next elections that were like in a half a year, and he didn't. Yeah, because the reputation cost of such even like information campaign was for him too expensive. Mm-hmm. So this declaration, I really agree that it's make like the cost, the reputation cost, and like if you just were thinking that, okay, you already have like millions and then you have also seat in parliament and it's great, but now considered all new factors that you will be under scrutiny, you'll risk criminal liability and so on. Yeah, people will be counting whether they really need it. Is it that attractive position or it's not that attractive position anymore?
So basically, to draw a conclusion, what we said, in this show. Basically, this week, Ukraine has not stopped being the most corrupt in Europe, but it's become the most transparent.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you soon.